Hey, thanks for joining me. If you weren't aware, Ecoflow just recently revamped or updated their River series of power stations. So this is the River 2, and Ecoflow sent it to me to do a review on, and these are just hitting the market. So we're going to find out what's new, how well it performs, and who this particular product is for. Let's check it out. All right, so we got to get this thing out of the box, and we're also going to cover, by the way, the 110 watt panel from Ecoflow. I have that as well. So we're going to test this with the 110 watt panel, which is what they usually recommend pairing it with, and we're going to see how all that goes. But for now, let's get this thing out of the box. There we go, one user manual. You can see this power station is super compact. And we get a nice heavy gauge AC power cable and a 12 volt car adapter with an XT60 connector on it. And other than the usual silica gel anti-moisture packets and an empty box, that's all we got. All right, so as you can see, this has that sort of iconic Ecoflow side handle on it. But because it's such a small unit, it really just has the one. So it's kind of an interesting placement for a handle, but it does allow you to keep that top open so you can put this in tight spaces. So you got your AC connector there and your XT60 input from solar or 12 volt car charger right there. And it has got just two AC plugs in the front. So one that's got the 3-prong and the one for a 2-prong. So two USB-A's and USB-C, two AC connectors, and a standard car output. Let's get this thing to testing, find out what its usable capacity is, see if the inverter, which I believe is rated for 300 watts continuous, 600 watts peak, but they also have this thing called X-Boost on this, which allows you, I think, to run devices that require more than 300 watts continuous, but it reduces the power load to those devices so that they can run. So it's not suitable for all devices, but some devices will be just fine. You know, they'll just run in a lower power state. So we'll check all that out. There is an app control for this. I haven't seen their app yet, so we're gonna take a look at the app. So let's jump forward in time and see where we end up. And we're back. All right, so there's a lot of ground to cover on this thing. So their list price on this is $229. I'm not sure if they're running any deals on this, but if there are, check the description below on that. But that at $229, that's about 35% cheaper already than the original Ecoflow River unit that was basically preceded this. So this is a lithium iron phosphate battery chemistry, so that's great. It's rated for 3,000 cycles to maintain at least 80% of its original capacity, and it weighs just under 8 pounds, so it's very light and very portable. Now, one of the things I do like to test on all my power stations is the no-load AC inverter draw. So if I don't have anything plugged into the AC outlets but have the inverter on, how much power is it consuming? Now, in this particular case, if I've got the configuration set up to allow the unit to continue running pretty much indefinitely with the inverter on and no power coming out of it, because you can configure that in the app, it will use about 5% per hour. And it's really nice that you can configure that behavior in the app, because if you've got a very low power device or a small fan or something that you want to run and it draws very low power, you can control from the app whether or not you want the unit to just keep running or with that low power or intermittent power draw, or whether you want it to just shut off and preserve battery life in those particular use cases. So again, having that app configurability is really super helpful. Now, in terms of usable battery capacity, as I mentioned, this has a rated capacity of 256 watt hours. On the DC discharge test, I was able to get 215 watt hours out of that 256 that's actually usable through the DC side. And so that equates to about 84%, we'll call it efficiency. It's basically regulated by the BMS. And I would say that's fairly average, maybe slightly above average. And then on the AC side, I'll run some video of that. I ran a test on the AC inverter using my watt meter, and I was able to get about 203 watt hours off of the AC discharge test. And that's about 79% of rated capacity. Now, this thing also has a feature called EPS. It's basically Ecoflow's version of UPS, or uninterruptible power supply. The difference is that uninterruptible power supply typically means that you're going to switch over from wall power to battery power in somewhere in the vicinity of 5 to 8 milliseconds. Now, Ecoflow's implementation of this EPS feature is a 30 millisecond switchover. So I wondered if that was going to be fast enough to not interrupt, say, my desktop PC in the event of a power outage. So I hooked it up, and I'll kind of show you how that went. So I've got my computer running into the AC, so it's being powered through the Ecoflow. You can see the AC input and output are basically identical here. So we are in EPS mode, and we're going to find out what happens whether or not EPS mode is sufficiently close to UPS mode. So let's go ahead and simulate a power outage by pulling the AC cable. And you can see we no longer have any input here, but we still have 105 watts output. And my computer did not reboot, so I still have power there. And everything is running up there. So this thing, even though it's not technically meeting the spec of a UPS, at least in my case, for a desktop computer, it does act as a pretty nice little backup power supply, and it essentially performs the same as a UPS. So as you can see, at least for that particular use case, this actually makes a nice little backup battery system for something like a PC, and it doesn't reboot your PC. At least it didn't for mine, and mine I would think would be relatively sensitive to that. So 30 milliseconds for that particular use case turns out just fine. By the way, if you're finding any of this information useful at all, please consider giving the video a thumbs up. I'd really appreciate that. Now, as far as I'm aware, all of the Ecoflow power stations do have mobile app support via Wi-Fi or Bluetooth, and the new River 2 is no exception. Let's run a quick video clip here, and you can take a quick look at the app, and you kind of see what you can do with it. Let's go ahead and launch the Ecoflow app. But I'll click on the River 2 here, and I'm looking currently at inputs. So the input, as you can see, is coming from the AC rather than solar or through the USB Type-C port. But if I click on the output side, you can see I've got 57 watts currently going out. So I've got a little bit going out via AC, and I can turn that on and off. And I have also got 12 volts, that's actually electric blanket, coming out of the 12 volt port, and then 4 watts coming out of the USB-A port. So a little bit of everything going on here, but if I click on the little gear up in the upper right-hand corner, I can configure a variety of things, which is very cool. First of all, I can give it a new name, which I've already done. I can adjust the charging speed. So I can take this all the way up to 360 watts, or if I want to, if I'm not in a hurry and I want to control battery life, I can maybe dial this down to a lower number and let it charge more slowly. There's the X Boost, which you can turn on and off. You can also limit your charge and discharge levels. These are just little things that you can dial in to your liking if you don't need the extra capacity, just to help prolong your battery life. Now you can also set all of the auto timeouts here. So overall for the unit, you can also set the screen timeout, which I like because I don't like the screen going out on me every few seconds. That's really annoying. And then obviously you can set the timeout just for the AC. And then a couple other things, you can update the firmware from here. And this is really nice. I wish all units would do this. There's specifications, and it'll actually load the specifications for this particular model. It'll show me the serial number. I can see what its rated capacity is and what its limits are in terms of, wattage inputs, 110 watts max, 8 amp max. It's kind of nice to have that as a quick reference if you're wondering what the capabilities of the unit are. So very nice app. I have to give Ecoflow credit. They did a great job on the app. I have to say that I really do like the extra configurability layers that the mobile app support does give you. And I wish all of power station brands supported that, but I would say only a small handful of them still currently are providing app support. Hoping that number grows over time, but Ecoflow is definitely with the program in that regard. Now, in terms of charging, this thing does charge much faster than the original Ecoflow River. This charged from 0 to 100% in just almost exactly 1 hour. It was about an hour and a half to get the full charge out of the original River. And if you're solar charging this from 0 to 100%, it can take anywhere from 3 to 6 hours, depending on how much solar you throw at it. They typically recommend a 100 or a 110 watt panel. I tested this with the 110 watt panel, and let me just kind of run some of the results of that, and you can see how that testing went. We've got intermittent sun and clouds, so we're getting a little bit of sun right now. This is the 110 watt panel from Ecoflow, and it comes in a case. And it's detachable from the case, but it comes with these carabiners that you can use to connect it to the case, and then you use the case as a stand if you don't want to hang the panel somewhere or lay it flat, which is another option, I guess, if your sun gets high enough in the sky. But you can, to some extent, change the angle by zipping these zippers in. So if you zip the zippers in a little bit, about halfway, it'll pull this down and allow you, with these little bungees on the bottom, to sort of lay this a little bit flatter. I have to be honest, it's kind of an awkward setup to get all these carabiners in, and we're just going to see in this intermittent sun conditions what kind of recharge times we can expect on this Ecoflow River 2. Now, this is relatively small capacity, right? It's only 256 watt hours, and it uses an XT connector in the back. Now, the panels come with MC4 natively, but they do not include an MC4 to XT cable in the box with the River 2. So if you want to charge this with solar, you have to get an XT60 cable. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and connect the XT60 cable in the back. It's right back here. And then we're going to see what kind of charge we get out of this panel. Like I said, right now we've got really sporadic sun. So I'm getting a whopping 20 watts, which isn't surprising considering the sun is largely obscured by the clouds right now. Hopefully we'll get a little bit better sun than that over the course of the day, but we'll see how we do. I'll check in on it periodically and kind of see in full sun what kind of watt numbers we actually get out of it. Yeah, 97 watts. That's fantastic. So actually, despite the what I consider to be kind of quirkiness of the deployment of this panel, the output of this panel is very good. I'm impressed with that. I can't believe we're getting 97 watts this time of year. We are right at 3.5 hours, 99%. But yeah, so 3 to 4 hours and very strong sun, and you definitely can top off this River 2 from Ecoflow with a 100 or a 110 watt solar panel like this one. So to wrap up, kind of talking about the solar panel from Ecoflow, this is a very well made solar panel. And it's a little tricky to deploy that and then tear it back down. That said, this is a very efficient panel. I was very impressed. This is one of the best performing panels that I have tested. So there's that. So been very happy with this. It feels very rugged. This is actually, because it does not have any integrated USB outputs on the panel itself, and the way it's designed, this thing is virtually waterproof. You could actually submerge this panel and it wouldn't really hurt the panel at all. So this is, in terms of water resistance or waterproofing, this is one of the most waterproof panels that I have had my hands on to date, aside from your standard sort of normal rigid panels that you would be mounting on the roof of a house, for example. So I have to give credit where credit is due. It's a very good panel, just a little quirky to deploy and a little on the pricey side, but it is an excellent, excellent panel. Now, in terms of USB ports, this does have a Type-C PD60 that is both input and output. So not only can you charge devices up to 60 watts through that port, that Type-C port in the middle, but you can also charge the unit up to 60 watts, provided you've got the charger and the type of cable. So you don't necessarily always have to charge this through the AC cable. You can charge it through the PD60 watt if you're not in a hurry, and you can do it that way. That takes upwards about 5 hours of time to charge it through that 60 watt port if you were going to charge it from 0 to 100%. Now let's quickly cover some things that I think are pretty common questions that I get a lot in the comments. What will this run, or what does it not run in particular that I might want to run? I mean, obviously this is a very good choice for something like just recharging all of your portable electronics, so cameras, cell phones, drone batteries, tablets, all that kind of thing, laptop batteries, stuff like that. But it's also great for lights and fans and powering those things, especially LED lights, and it'll run those things for a pretty fair amount of time. Something like a 12-volt fridge, I did test this to make sure that it will actually start up my 50-quart 12-volt fridge, which is the biggest one that I have, and it handled that no problem. And at those kind of typical power draws in refrigerator mode, you could probably get, and it's going to depend on the refrigerator. It's also going to depend on the ambient temperature that you're running the refrigerator in. but you could expect somewhere between say 12 to 15 hours of runtime with this small power station in refrigerator mode. And in freezer mode, you can chop that number in half. So somewhere between 6 and 7.5 hours probably in freezer mode, because this just isn't a lot of capacity for that particular use case, but it definitely will do it. Now, if you're running this like for emergency backup power for a laptop or a desktop PC with a monitor and a sound system, this will probably give you somewhere in the neighborhood of 2 hours of runtime, plus or minus a few minutes. For those kinds of devices. You could also run a CPAP machine with this if that's something that you need to run. But be aware that it's probably only going to run it without the heating mode, because I understand some of these have a heating mode in it. And as soon as you introduce the heating element, that is going to up the continuous watt draw significantly and dramatically reduce the amount of runtime. So let's say you're at something like 40 watts continuous on this with a CPAP machine. You're still probably only going to get 5 to 6 hours of runtime. So that's a little bit of a stretch for something in this small of a capacity. Now, despite some of the marketing material I've seen where the X-Boost will allow you to run some devices at lower power levels than they normally would run to keep the device from tripping, I don't think that really applies well to devices that require heating. And the only exception I would make to that is maybe electric blankets. So 12 volt or AC electric blankets, no problem. Those really don't draw all that much power. But if I need to heat water, for example, like making coffee or an electric skillet, things that typically are going to draw somewhere in that 1,000 watt or up kind of range, even though you can technically run those devices to some degree with the X-Boost, I don't think you're going to like the result because they're not going to run at their peak performance. But I'll put a clip up here and show you what happened in my particular case when I tried to just do a single brew K-cup kind of a thing, and you'll see what happened even with X-Boost turned on. Single, and then brew immediately shuts off. So yeah, I would say that generally speaking, anything that heats water is going to consume more output than this thing can really provide, even with X-Boost, because the heating elements just aren't going to work properly in that low power state. And as you can see, my coffee maker just is having none of it. It just shuts down. So I would not assume that this is going to be able to brew coffee for you. So while X-Boost does give you the benefit to kind of run devices that normally wouldn't run at all on something in this inverter capacity, I think the benefit you get from that is fairly minimal. So, take that with a grain of salt. There are some things it's going to work pretty well for and some things that it's not. All right, so some final thoughts on this. I really think that this thing is an outstanding value at just a little over $200. It does not have wireless charging on top. So that is one thing that it's kind of missing, but it does have app support. It does have PD 60 watt in and out. And I love the fact that I can configure this via the Ecoflow app. It's really well done. And I really do like that EPS mode. I think even though that it's 30 milliseconds, is quite a bit higher than your typical UPS of 5 to 8 millisecond switchover, it actually still works fine for at least what I would use it for. And so even though it's not technically a UPS, I think it covers that function for most people and how they would use a UPS. So that's definitely not marketing hype. It's something that is actually still pretty useful. So this has been my first exposure to Ecoflow products, and I have to say so far I'm very impressed with both the 110 watt panel and the newly designed River 2 power station. Both excellent products and definitely worth a look. If you found any of this information helpful, please consider giving me a thumbs up if you haven't already done so. Really appreciate that. I've got more power stations, solar panel type stuff coming, so stay tuned for that. I do hope to see you in the next one. Until then, have fun out there.